Okay, so in the last video we set up the actual art for the door frame and the door itself, but Unreal still doesn't know what we wanted to do next. So we know, Unreal doesn't. So let's talk to Unreal with Blueprint and tell it what we wanted to do. So we've got a door mesh and a door frame. What we need next is something that the player can sort of walk into, allow Unreal to detect the player, so that then we can send information to some kind of function or something that makes the door open. So we need a way to check if the player is anywhere near the door. Okay? So in real life, what you would use is some kind of probably like an infrared proximity sensor above the door or something like that. In Unreal we don't have one of those, but we do have something called trigger volumes. And what a trigger volume is basically it's usually a box cube, and whenever a player steps inside this cube, a signal is sent, almost like an alarm, to the system. And when that signal is sent, we can use it to do stuff. So think of it almost like pulling a string that is attached to, I don't know, a lever on a door. And when you pull the string, it pulls a lever up and the door becomes unlocked. That's kind of like what we're doing here, except we're doing it in a really fancy way with Blueprint. So let's see how we can do that. Let's come over here to add a component. We're going to add a new component to our door. This time we're going to go down and we're going to go to shapes, and we're going to pick a shape. So we have different shapes. We have spheres, capsules, and boxes, and you can really use whichever one you want. You can use a sphere if you wanted to. I'm not going to. I'm going to use a box because a box is going to work a little bit better with this door. So I'm going to select the box, and we're going to rename the box, and we're going to call this trigger volume. You call it anything you want, proximity sensor, whatever. I'm calling it trigger volume. It's usually helpful to keep names very simple and logical. That way, if you walk away from this and come back to this same project 2 months later, you're not looking at this stuff trying to refresh your mind going, what in the world is a turtle proximity gopher smasher sensor? What is that? If you use a common logical name, it'll be much easier to jump in here and understand what it was you were doing that night. So anyway, so I've renamed this to trigger volume. Now you'll notice inside of our viewport here we have this yellow box. And the cool thing is we can change the size of this yellow box. This yellow box is going to be basically the area defined by our proximity sensor. So if the player steps into any area that is inside of this box, the door will get the signal to open or do something. Probably open or blow up and sabotage the player. That'd be pretty cool too. So what we're going to do here is we got to resize this box because right now it's way too small. The player would literally have to crawl on the ground and stick his face right at the bottom of the door right here in order to get the door to open, which well, it could be pretty funny if you're making a game where you're trolling players and stuff like that. But we're not doing that right now. We're going to be nice, and we're going to create a big a huge box so the player can walk into and get the door to open. So a couple of ways we can do this. We can take the scale over here and we can increase it, so we can say 100, 100, 100, something like that. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to do this in a much simpler way. I'm going to take the box, use the scale tool, and I'm just going to scale it up like this, which is a little bit easier. I'm going to move it, and let me see, it's a little bit big, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit smaller, and maybe I'll take the Y scale, the green handle, and I'll scale it out like this. It's a little bit big, but it's okay, it's good, because when we walk into the area here, we don't have to be all careful about, oh, are we inside the small box or not. We'll have it take up a generous amount of real estate, so it makes it easier for the player, and they don't get frustrated and call you up in the middle of the night demanding your money back. Alright, cool. So basically our trigger volume is already set up. It's already there. So I'll save this. And another thing about Blueprint is, let's actually jump in here inside the map. If I look at my door here, I don't see that yellow volume, the trigger volume anymore. It's not here, but when I go here, it's actually here. So what's happening? Well, we have to do something called compile. If you've ever worked with code before, then you're familiar with what the word compile is. I'm assuming everyone watching this video hasn't worked with code before, so this is probably one of the first times you hear the word compile. May even be the very first time. I don't know. Compile basically means that we take all of the changes we made to this blueprint so far while we were working on it. You know, when I added this trigger volume, scaled it up, moved it around, stuff like that. We need to compile most of the time so that the changes are compiled and hard-coded, so to speak, so that the game knows and the game can play. It's kind of like saving, but not. But just don't worry about it. So if you go up here to the top, you're going to see this compile button. It's got a question mark. Okay, that means that this blueprint has been changed and needs to be compiled, and it has not been compiled yet. So you probably should do that. So the compile is actually a very, very difficult and tedious process. What you do is you click this button, you get a green check mark, and your blueprint is now compiled. Okay, so I lied. It's not a very tedious or difficult process. So if I jump back inside of my viewport here in the game, you can see now our yellow trigger volume is inside of our level. It's part of the blueprint. It's there. If I move this around, you'll see it's all part of the blueprint. The blueprint is one whole item that encapsulates all these different components: the door frame, the door, the trigger volume, any stuff we have attached to this as components. So always remember to compile. Now, I like to work fast, so I always use a ton of hotkeys whenever I work in the hundreds of programs that I work in every day for a living. So there's a shortcut to compile, and the shortcut by default is F7 on the keyboard. So you're going to notice that I'm compiling blueprints real quick, and I'm not hitting that button up there. It's because I'm using the hotkey. It's faster, easier, simpler, saves a ton of time. So I'm going to be doing that from now on, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so now we've got our trigger volume. All right, let's go back to the map. I'm going to jump in. We don't see the trigger volume. One thing that's important to note is that trigger volumes are not visible when you play the actual game. They're meant to be invisible. The player doesn't see them. The player doesn't, run into them. It's not an invisible wall. If I walk over here, you'll see that I'm inside the trigger volume, but I can't tell. Basically, if I never showed you that I made that, you would never even know that it's here. But it's what's going to trigger this door to open. And that's actually how a lot of games are made.